Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. My name is Becca Clark, and I am the student recruiter for Thunderbird's online master degree, Master of Applied Leadership and Management. And a couple of housekeeping items. I will send the recording tomorrow or the next day, along with the slides. And even if you miss a few minutes of it, I'll send the whole thing. We do have a Q&A box at the bottom. Please start typing your questions as soon as you have them. Dr. Polk will take questions at the end of her presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Laura Polk, a Senior Program Manager and Professor at Arizona State University, and currently teaches organizational leadership. Thank you, Dr. Polk.
Thank you, Becca. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Project Management for Leaders. As Becca already said, my name is Dr. Laura Polk. I'm very excited to have you here today to discuss project management, what it is, and what it can do for you as a leader. I know we have a lot of people from all around the globe that are at different levels of leadership, whether it be in their organization or just starting out in their careers. Some of you are at nonprofits. Some of you want to become project managers, and some of you just want to know how these tools used in project management really help you to be a more effective leader. So welcome. As Becca mentioned, we will have a short time at the end to discuss your questions, and that's the best part, because with your engagement, that's how we learn. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, welcome for those of you just joining. My name is Dr. Laura Polk, and I know a lot of you are from different areas all over the globe. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate you as part of the larger group of the Thunderbird School. If you have questions about any of our degree programs, please reach out to Becca, and she will definitely help you with any information that you might seek. All right, so let's talk about project management for leaders and where this topic came out of. A lot of you, like I already mentioned, are in positions of leadership now, or you're seeking to get there. But a lot of studies show us that over the last 10 to 20 years, every leadership responsibility has grown. And so there's more work to do and typically less time to do it in. So with the growth of leadership responsibility, leaders, managers, like I said, if you're even beginning in your career, there's a lot more work to be done. So these are just some examples of some of the work that leaders have and that keep growing every day. A lot of you manage or work with a team of employees. If you don't, you might work with people outside of your organization or with other groups in an unofficial capacity. We work with a lot of different multiple technology platforms now. You know, we have Google, we have different platforms that serve us every day, and those keep changing and expanding, and we have to learn how to use those tools. A lot of you will learn to drive several projects to completion, and if you haven't already, hopefully you can have at least one thing that you take away from today and that you can put into practice. Some of you organize budgets as well, or in some cases, multiple budgets. So you're managing not just the people side and the process side, but the finances and trying to figure out how to make the best use of that money and in which cases, how to do that. In addition to that, you're asked probably more frequently than not to report on your progress and any challenges to senior leadership or stakeholders that you report to. So if you belong to a large company, sometimes this is the CEO, your direct manager, external stakeholders that have invested in that company. They want to know what's going on, and more importantly, they want to know how you got to where you are. So you're held accountable for ROI, which we know as return on investment. So if you went ahead with a project or you're working on something specific, where did that money go and what happened after it was spent? We get that question a lot. The last one, although it's not as common as a lot of people work with or deal with, is requesting to sponsor a project. So if you sit in leadership or you sit on a board or another group outside of an organization, someone may reach out to you and ask, you know, I'm working on XYZ project. could you sponsor my project? And so what they're really asking for is, if you're willing to do this, what is the work that's required? So as we continue to grow with those leadership responsibilities and there's more work to do, that's where project management for leaders comes in. And to help us define that more specifically, just for today, we're going to talk about what project management for leaders is and what it is not. So in today's session, you can learn a few things. You'll learn to help prioritize your time, track your progress on any projects that you currently work on or maybe you're looking to take on, to follow up with essential stakeholders, and to transform your leadership through actionable items. So today is about things that you can put into practice now. It is not about project management certification, although that is a great tool as well, which I will mention at the end, and maybe how to get more information with that as well. Okay, so first and foremost, what is project management? Some of you may have worked with project managers or seen the nomenclature, project manager, and think to yourself, I'm not really sure what this is. I don't know how it applies to me. As our job demands continue to grow, at least within the States and externally, a lot of jobs are requiring project management tools or familiarity. And so what that means to you is, how do you use those tools effectively? If you're a project manager, you become certified, typically through the Project Management Institute. And so this is actually from their website. Project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques used to meet project requirements. And so it's really important when we talk about project management for leaders that we understand what a project is. So a project is something that is a unique thing you're trying to accomplish within a small amount of time. So in other words, there's a start and there's an end to a project. If there is no start and an end to it, it's probably not a project. It might be something else. So we have a scenario that we'll go through today, and I'll talk a little bit more about project timelines and project starts and ends and how that relates to you. So more information coming from the Project Management Institute as well, but just so that we know kind of a baseline of what project management is, this is for you as well. Okay, so I'm guessing some of you have been in this situation where you're wondering how to accomplish a task or a series of projects, or maybe even one project, and what that means for you. So typically for leaders, when we talk about managing a project or project management for leaders, we usually will divide our projects into two groups. The first one is managing people, and the second one is managing processes. This is important because if you don't have the right people in place to help you move your project along, it doesn't matter what processes you put in place. And so a lot of times when we're asked to do something, whether it be a small project or something coming down the line, we fail to accurately and correctly identify the people who are going to be involved in the project. That could be your project team, that could be an outside vendor, that could be anyone else that's really crucial to the project. So if you take away nothing else from today, remember the two biggest things in this for leadership are managing the people and managing the processes. So once we've identified the people who are going to help us move this project along, we have to identify the processes in which to do so. And so part of that involves the project scope, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the other part of that has to do with resources. So money, time, tools, including technology that are used to help us finish or complete the project. Okay, so project scope and success metrics. Once you have been either assigned a project or you're working towards something with other leadership, one of the most important things you can do, again, before that project starts, is to identify what we define as project scope and success metrics. How many of you have started a project finished a project or worked with a group of leaders, everything comes to an end and you sit there and go, were we successful? How do we know? We finished the project, but were we successful? And so the first part of that has to do with defining the project scope. One of the best examples I have of defining a project scope is, say someone comes to you and they want to implement a new technology platform in your company, or maybe you're just working with a new technology platform and they say you have 2 months to do it. We're going to give you these resources and money and these people to help do this in your organization. And you go, that's great. And so you start your project and your coworker, Sally, comes along and says, you know, it would be really great if you could put this into your project and have us use that platform once it's in as well. And so you think, yeah, why not? We could absolutely help you with that. And so the challenge being, since that actually falls outside of your project scope, some of the resources that you're using or funds that you're getting are going to be going to other places. So defining your project scope so that you know and the other leaders you work with know exactly what you're working towards and the amount of resources you have is really, really important. So if you're trying to find a good way to grasp project scope, just think about what a project is and what it is not. Outside of that, if you're driving a project or you're working with a group of leaders who are also on that project, is to define success metrics. So sitting down or having a teleconference or maybe just an email exchange with a few bullet points saying, how will we know if we've been successful with this project once we end? And sometimes it has to do with more qualitative things, such as we explored a different technology vendor, or some of it is very quantitative, which is we needed to reduce costs by 50%. And knowing what that means to you and your group is very important so that you can say that you were successful or not at the end of your project. Okay, so this is the engagement part for today. And we're going to use this scenario to kind of guide us through an example of how we might use this. So no matter where you are, again, in the world or whatever level you might be at, using this as a way to engage and practice the skill set is one of the best things you can do. So our project scenario today is with a man named Chris. Chris looks very heavily involved in his work with his glasses. Project scenario, Chris works as a manager at a telecom company. He has been tasked with integrating a new phone system for his team and has a 1-month time frame. Chris will need to identify how to integrate the new phone system, train his team to use the phones, and report back to his leadership regarding the progress. So, as you may recall, one of the first things that we should do to implement project management for leaders is to define what the project is. So within this scenario, the project is integrating a new phone system. We know that we have a 1-month time frame, and we know that there's some people, right? We're managing people and processes in this part. So our people have to do with Chris, who's the manager. Looks like he needs to train his team. There may also be a group of individuals that actually install those phones and then reporting back to leadership. So leaders regarding the progress and whether or not he was able to do this project successfully. On the process side, we have the integration of the new phone system, as well as learning how to use the new phone system. So again, trying to identify the people part of this and the process part of this will help us moving forward. Okay, so steps to get started. We already talked a little bit about identifying the project scope. So remember what the project is and what it is not. So if someone comes to Chris and says, I see that you have $500,000 to do this project, we think it would help my area over here, Chris should say no, because technically that falls outside of his project scope, and that's essential for him to maintain the use of his resources. We talked a little bit about the identification of people and processes. prioritization of time is very important depending on where you are and who your stakeholders are, who you report back to. We know that he's been given 1 month to do this. And we also know that he has to track his progress and follow up with his stakeholders. So that includes everything: what's going well, what's maybe not going well, what are the challenges, and what are the successes. And then we have to identify any of the action items or steps to take to make sure that we can complete the project. Okay, so again, a lot of this is repetitive, but it's just to kind of help you get into the mindset of, as a leader, how do I use these tools to get me on track to make sure that I have a good project? And so the first one is, again, we identify the project scope, implement a new phone system in 1 month. We identify those people. So we've identified Chris, the telecom leaders, his 5 employees, and a technical support team. And then the process is getting the new phones, changing out the old phones, and then training his team how to use the new phones. Okay, so this is a chart that I've created to help us track the scenario in the project. I used an Excel spreadsheet for this because it's most accessible. You could also use a Google Sheet, and there are also specific types of technology platforms that are used within project management. But if you're not a project manager per se that needs it, using an Excel sheet or a chart, creating one for yourself, is one of the easiest things that you can do. It's quick, it's a way to get organized, and it helps with prioritizing time. So let's put ourselves in Chris's shoes and talk a little bit about the breakdown of prioritizing our time. So within the first week, our timeline would have us separate out our stakeholders. So again, Chris, the telecom leaders, 5 employees, and the technical support team. And our first deliverable or end result for that week would be to roll out the project to a team and identify who is responsible for the work. Okay, this is really important. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on projects and we've never had a kickoff or a share out at the very beginning of what the project was and who was involved. Very crucial to the success of your project and your leadership. Identify who's on first, make sure that they know so that everyone can follow along with you as you complete the project. Within the second week, you won't need all of your stakeholders, but you'll still need some of them. This is where the real work begins. So you have Chris, his 5 employees, and your technical support team. So one of the things that they might do is discuss a backup feature if the phones don't work and phase out the old phones. So we're getting ready to kind of go from one group of phones to another group of phones. You have to think about, what if it doesn't go quite right, and how are we going to make sure the phones are still up and working? The third week, you still have the same people, same stakeholders. We're going to work to change and update the phone systems, and employees will continue to work as needed. Good to know, right? Because if you're working in a company that still needs phone service, you have to have someone there to pick up the phone, and the phones need to be working to do that. Finally, we get to week 4, and you have Chris, the telecom leaders, his 5 employees, technical support team. And what are they working on? They're saying, we went there, we changed out the old phones, and now what? They're going to report back to Chris on how those phone systems are working. Chris can then take that information and communicate back up to his boss or his group of stakeholders on the progress of the new phones, or if there's other support needed. And then lastly, in the week 5, in the final week, Chris and the telecom leaders will be sitting down. Hopefully, if they're not, they can use something online to connect if they're across the globe. They will sit down and do what we call a retrospective on how the project went and how it was implemented. Again, very important, even if you do a small project, to take the time at the very end to sit down with your stakeholders and say, how'd we do? Was it successful? Okay, I promise we won't stay in Excel spreadsheet land forever, but this is important because what this will help you do is look at tracking progress and stakeholder follow-up. So if nothing else, if you have a spreadsheet that you use like this every week. It's just a way for you to help keep track on a weekly basis who your stakeholders are, what your deliverable is, was it complete, and if not, what are the next steps? So we already talked a little bit about weeks 1 and 2. So I will glaze over those only because we know within the first 2 weeks, we roll out the project plan to the team and we ask them about how it's going, how they're going to discuss the backup features and phase out the old phones. So for the sake of the scenario, we will say that both of those items went well within weeks 1 and 2. And so within week 3, Chris thinks everything is on track and going well, meets with his stakeholders, and they talk about changing and updating the new phone systems. Employees will continue to work as needed. But as you can see, we've highlighted in yellow that it didn't get complete in the 3rd week. And we're trying to figure out what happened. So Chris is asking, why didn't this happen? We discover that the team trying to implement the new phone systems doesn't have a particular set of cables. So Chris decides to schedule an emergency meeting and get the cables and get information on what he can do in the meantime. This is very common in projects. You will have things that come up that are unexpected, that you haven't planned for. Some of them may require more time and resources from you. Some of them may ask for more money for things that either weren't thought of at the very beginning or things that you might need down the line. This is very common in any project. So this is a great way to track and be ready for it if it happens. So if we fast forward to week 4, Chris has scheduled an emergency meeting the previous week, and now he's back on track. They report back to him how the new phone systems are working, and he communicates up through the stakeholders the progress of the new phones and how the new cables are working. This is important because it shows you as a leader being able to say, we had a situation, this is what happened, we were able to resolve it, and now we're back on track. Or in some cases, maybe you're not back on track and you might need more time. So you review the quality of the new phone systems and discuss with the team. You then compile the information and feedback for project completion. So it's been a few weeks and we're almost to the project close. In the last week, you report back to your stakeholders and you let them know how things went. So again, for Chris, if we were going to say things went well, we were still able to complete what was within project scope. We were still able to implement the phone systems and we were still able to make the 1-month timeline. However, we can absolutely bring up that we weren't able to get them implemented right away and installed because we were missing cables. And so what this does is it helps you create a lessons learned. So in the next 6 months, if another team decides to do this exact same project, you can share with them or they come to you and you can say, this is great. One thing for you to know is that we didn't have cables. So make sure you're thinking about that. It's a great way to help other people within your organization prepare and make sure that they have what they need to be successful too. Okay, so let's talk about actionable items within leadership. Every leader has a lot on their plate, and we know that the last thing you probably want to do is schedule another meeting or ask people for more time when time is tight. So these are just some basic things that I've done that I found success with that project managers use all the time. And a lot of leaders will use these as well. So when you're working on a project, it's a good idea to schedule weekly meetings with stakeholders and shareholders if you need to. It keeps everyone on track and it lets everyone know that there's communication that's consistent and it lets them feel that they're part of the project even though they may not be needed every week. Scheduling additional meetings when they're needed. So in the Chris scenario, he didn't have cables that he needed. So he absolutely had to schedule an emergency meeting and figure out how to get those cables. Within your project group or within your meeting group, if you don't have someone to take your meeting notes, I would find one. Or if that's you, creating a good place to have your notes, what's completed, what's discussed, helps track the project and keep it on track so that if someone comes to you and says, did we discuss this last week? And you don't remember, you can say, let's go back to the notes or let's go back to the meeting minutes And that information is housed in one central place so everyone has access to it. The other thing I would recommend is continue to communicate throughout project updates to the team. So this is very important. Even if you have stakeholders who are working on the project that aren't involved weekly, making sure that they have an update. You can use, like I mentioned, any products will work for this. I like email, it's easy, a lot of people have access to it. Other project managers will use different technology platforms. You may have heard of these. Jira is a very popular one within organizations. It's a system where they use to track all of their projects. Trello. Kanbanchi is something that you find, it's a Google product. I'm pretty sure that's for free if you go onto the Google platform, or at least there's a sample that you can try out. And there's different types of platforms depending on where you're located and what type of company that you work for. Again, like I said, I like using Excel and Google products because they're usually free or accessible to everyone. So if you're not involved in an organization, but you still want to practice these things, those are great tools for you as well. Okay, and then lastly, we talk about project completion and retrospective. So if you can get everyone involved at the very end of that, it's important to hear from them, especially when you're trying to learn what went well and what didn't, when you're looking at your project scope and you're trying to define whether or not your project was a success. So if you can get involvement and participation from every stakeholder, that's the best. If you can't, a brief review from them at the earliest convenience, or an email regarding how the project went for them is a great thing to include. So at that meeting, you call maybe 30 minutes or an hour, everyone meets and you talk about the project deliverables and the deadlines. What were they? Did you meet them? Was it successful or not? Any challenges or concerns that you encountered. So again, with this scenario, we didn't have certain cables that were required for phones. And then lessons learned. Essentially, if Chris were going to do a project similar to this at the very beginning, he might reach out to the new company and ask them, do you have the correct cables for these phones? And so it helps keep the work moving forward with other projects. And then any other steps that would come for another project. So down the line, if they were going to do something else, would they include other people or would they include other processes? So for example, if they were looking to do a similar project, who else might they include, and why? Would they be helpful to the project or would they hinder the project? All things to consider when you're looking to do a project for anything really. Okay, so part of this is learning how to try a new skill set. And once you put these things into practice, it helps you learn and it helps you find out within your leadership what will fit and maybe what won't. So I always tell students and anyone else out there, if you're not sure, give it a try. Practice makes perfect, or at least it lets you have an idea of how you want to use these items within your leadership. So even one technique. So like I said at the beginning, if you take nothing else from this, just looking at who the people are and what the processes are, very, very important. It will help you, and I know it will help transform your leadership no matter what you're working on. And it's a great way to try out new things as well. Okay, so we also talked about any other external resources and what you could also do in addition to this. Learning to become a project manager is great. There's also another set of skills called becoming a Scrum Master, which is very similar to project management, except it's project management light. Both of these have different classes and resources available through the Project Management Institute. I like the Project Management Institute because it has such a large network. It is a global network, and if you haven't seen them online or within your area, like a physical place where you can go, they do have 300 local chapters internationally too. So it's a great way to create a network for yourself. It's also a great way to learn because depending on who's part of those networks, you can have anyone from a CEO of a company all the way down to someone who's just learning how to get started in project management. to everyone in the middle who has a project management certification, also called a PMP. So if you haven't already, make sure you check out the website, because it would be a great resource to you if you're interested in using these tools more frequently. Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk about how this can help reframe and change your leadership. I think Becca might help us with some questions. I hope there are some. Becca, do we have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Polk. We do have some time for some questions, and please type those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I would also like to remind you to please sign up and join us for our next week's webinar, April 25th. I've put the details in the chat box. But we do have time for questions now. We haven't seen any questions come in yet, so let's wait a minute.
Has anyone tried project management tools and found them to be successful, or is there anyone looking to try a different tool on a project they're currently working on?
We have a question from Jimmy. What are your thoughts on how firms may move from the traditional waterfall to agile or lean?
Ooh, good question. Thank you for bringing that up. For those of you listening, Jimmy had a question about agile project management style versus waterfall project management style. And so when you're thinking about these things as a consumer or as a user, it's important to remember that different processes are used at different companies for different reasons. And so in my experience, I've actually seen more companies, Jimmy, move towards the agile type of project management because they may not need as heavily access to those tools that you would find in a waterfall type of environment. So for those of you unfamiliar with project management styles such as waterfall or agile, in a nutshell, waterfall is essentially, I hope I'm getting this right, it's an upside down pyramid versus a right side up pyramid, which is a triangle. And what it does is it forces internal stakeholders and employees to thoroughly review every part of the project. So scope, requirements, which we didn't quite cover because it's a little bit more heavily involved in project management. And essentially what it does is it slows down the process and it makes things more thorough. It's also used in companies that are not reliant upon technology or technical heavy projects. And that can be for a number of reasons. Sometimes I should correct myself. Sometimes it is used for companies that have technical heavy projects because it slows it down and makes sure it's more thorough. But as I previously mentioned, moving towards an agile type of environment is more common with companies because it's quicker and it is also leaner. In project management as well as in leadership, we talk about lean management. And making sure that you can do things as efficiently and as quickly as possible. So I believe that they will be moving more towards the agile type of technology and project management style. If you are interested in that versus full-on project management, I would recommend Scrum certification, which is more of a project management light version.
Mariana. Oh, thank you. Mariana answered your question, Dr. Polk, and she effectively uses Jira and Slack. And she asks, are there any additional tips for managing remote teams?
Ooh, that's another really good question. Yes. So you already use Jira, which is fantastic, and Slack. Those are both two great technology platforms that are in existence. Depending on where you are or which organization you work for, you may have access to those. If you do, phenomenal. You should use them. If you don't, that's okay. There are other ways to do this. Managing remote employees is very challenging because you have people all over the world, or in some cases, in different time zones, and that really impacts when you can meet with them. I would say the best thing you can do is work with those employees, or the one or two maybe that are on different time zones, and ask them what compromises they can make. So I actually have a colleague right now, and she's working remote every month. She's in a different country, and so she's on completely different time zones than we are. And from her perspective, it was just, what compromises can I make? So maybe for really important meetings or absolutely necessary meetings, she has to be available at 4 a.m. in the morning, which is a challenge, versus not being available to make our meeting at all. But then also working with that person, if you can, you might not be able to, but if you can, asking them what else they can set up outside of those structured times, because not everyone is available. As a leader, you can always inspect what you expect. And what I mean by that is, if you expect work from someone or deliverables, you can use project management tools such as Jira, Slack, and then Excel documents to help them show you what they've completed by the end of the day or the week, or however you might want to do that. And it helps you help them if they're tracking towards, project completion. If you find out that someone's working on something and they've hit a wall, like in the Chris scenario, and they don't have cables, if you know that, right, they send that to you, or you're communicating that, they're communicating that to you, you know how to help them, and you can help partner with them. So I hope that helps, but I'm glad to hear you're using Jira and Slack. Those are great tools.
From Camilla, do you have any experience with Asana, and what are your thoughts on that?
Did you say Asana?
Asana.
Asana. Thank you, Becca. I actually do not have experience with Asana. I've done had a privilege of doing a demo with Asana, and so I don't have anything past that. I'm neutral at this point on whether or not you should use it or not, and I apologize, I don't have a better answer for you.
From Courtney, do you have any recommendations on working with outside stakeholders on projects that come from very different cultures and have different communication styles?
This is an excellent question. It speaks volumes to the Thunderbird spirit and Thunderbird community, and so I very much appreciate this question. It's 2019, and you are absolutely going to work with someone at some point or another from a different culture, different belief systems, different structures, and it is completely normal to have some type of conflict arise, and it's no one's fault. It's just a difference of how they do things and how you do things. Specifically with stakeholders outside of the country from where you work or outside of your company, if you can, and I know it's not feasible because it's not always financially feasible, if you're able to meet with them in person, even if it's at the start of a project or you host them so they come to visit you, if you can meet them in person, it really is a great way to build relationships. It helps because you understand maybe where they're coming from. Also, researching that culture of the individuals that you're trying to serve that are in other countries is very, very good idea. And then it helps them understand that you are also making in good faith, you're extending the olive branch, so to speak. So you're trying to understand where they're coming from and how you might best work together. I'm trying to think of a good example of this. We had been working with an outside stakeholder for a technology company, and there was a religious holiday that had come up, and we had deliverables due, I think, on a Friday that were during that religious holiday. And our group that we were working with internally didn't know. We simply did not know that day that they would not be working or available. And so it was definitely a good lessons learned for us and a good realization that we needed to be more aware. And we also needed to make accommodations if we could. So letting them know it's okay that we didn't have this date scheduled correctly. Can we reschedule the following week? And as you mentioned, it's a challenge, right? Because you can't always see and know exactly what's going on. But if you reach out and you try to build those relationships and get to know the people, managing people, remember, and then the processes, it's a lot easier when you hit the walls. And that is a very common thing. That's not just you. It happens in pretty much every organization now. That was a great question. Wow.
From Mike, do you have any suggestions on best ways to diagram processes so they can be simplified and tracked?
Ooh, you guys are really involved in this. I love these questions. Yes, so diagramming processes. There are different practices, again, depending on which project management style and philosophy you follow. And so the processes for waterfall versus agile are going to be different. But first and foremost, if you can, or if you have access to a whiteboard or a wall or a sheet, especially at the project beginning, getting everyone together and putting that, I'm going to try using this pen. Putting that up on the whiteboard is a great way to do it. What I found too is when you encounter different learners and different communication styles, drawing something out in a visual representation sometimes is a lot easier than just writing it out or using numbers the quantitative way. I'm going to try using this pen. We'll see how well it works. So, whoop, here we go. So let's say that we're going to open up an ice cream company. I'm in Phoenix, so ice cream is very important in the summer here. And we know that we have 30 days. That's not, we'll say 300 days. Oop. We have 300 days, and we want to start from the very beginning. What is this project going to look like? And so you start to manage and look at, again, the people and processes, especially when you talk about mapping out things. So the easiest way you can do this is with a T-chart. T-charts are used in every discipline, every company, every corporation. People use these for a lot of different things. They also use them for Delta, which is universal sign for change, which we'll talk about in a minute. So you identify the people, right? So we want to hire employees, managers. I apologize if you can't read my writing. And we'll just say, chef, you need someone to make the ice cream. And then administrative, your admin, and then your processes, right? So one of the best things you can do is start to ask questions, open-ended questions. How do we make ice cream? Easy enough, right? Maybe you get a recipe. Who else makes ice cream? In the States, we have a company by the name of Dairy Queen, and they actually run a very successful ice cream company. I guarantee you they have a process for that in place. And so when you talk about diagramming out processes, it not only helps to draw, that's my ice cream cone. Again, not the best drawing. It helps you learn what else might be available if you allow your team an open space to ask questions. So part of the process should be asking questions, especially if it's already available. And if it is already available, what does that process look like? And do you have access to it? A lot of this is searchable on the internet. And so you can look at different processes that give you flexibility to change or tweak. And sometimes it's less about reinventing the wheel and just looking at what's already established. If you're starting from scratch, that's a little bit more challenging. But again, starting with a whiteboarding session and or a sprint. So in project management, we talk about sprints. Sometimes it's a 6-week or 8-week sprint, and that's all the team will work on. So they'll work on sprints and having outlines of different processes. So maybe the first one would be ice cream recipe, and the next one would be manufacturing or machinery required, and then the next one would be, and so you give yourself the time and space to do that if you have those resources. In addition to this, if you have a process, so let's say that you go with someone else who already has a process and it's established, you can look at what I said, the delta, which is the universal sign for change, and say, what do we change? And if we change that, would it be effective where I am within my organization for the project I'm working on? And sometimes that's just as good, if not better, especially when you're under a tough timeline. Good question.
A question from Owen. What happens if the financial resources are limited and what you have on reserve is not enough? How do you handle this critical situation, taking into consideration the deadline cannot be extended?
This is another really good question. I appreciate this, and I appreciate we have people that are using project management tools already. These challenges you mentioned are very common. These come up a lot. So you're talking specifically about financial resources. And I know because you have a time constraint as well, you can't always ask for more funds or money and get that. Sometimes you can, depending on what it is, and sometimes you can't. The first thing I would say is, who is in charge of the budget? So who on your project team is in charge of the budget? And I would ask yourself and really ask the team and be honest about it. Is this person really effective in managing the budget? Sometimes they are, and it's just you've had lots of project changes and contingencies, and so that money has run out. And sometimes maybe they're not, or maybe that their workload is so high they don't have enough time to dedicate to really reining in on the budget as part of your team. So again, going back to the whole managing people and processes, if for whatever reason you have to look at someone else to help manage that budget and manage it more effectively, that's an option. You always want to be delicate about how you handle that and make sure that person feels appreciated if you have to bring in another person to manage the budget, and tightening up on those things. If you're not able to do that, you can look at your processes again. So if you're not able to get what you need and finish your project in the same amount of time, so by your timeline, and you don't have any money, you look at what other resources do you have. So a lot of times we think of resources in terms of capital and money, and within large organizations, sometimes the human capital outweighs the financial capital by 1,000 or more. And sometimes people have the abilities to help with things that you would normally pay for or outsource. One of the largest things that we get questions for, at least for funds, have to do with coding. People that code for a living or people that write code. There may be people in your organization that already do that and might be able to get permission from their manager, for example, to help your project team accelerate the project if you don't have finances to hire someone in an external vendor. Other companies rely heavily on external partnerships to either, I don't want to say gift, but they will let you have access to people that can help with that project. They may even grant you funds if it's something that you would consider doing in partnership with them. So I would say if you're out of money, especially, look at the other resources that you do have and what people you do have access to, and start asking some questions on how you might get to where what you're trying to achieve, and you might find some where you least expect it.
From Heba, the safe, agile world has changed the face of traditional project management. Safe, agile methodologies, if implemented correctly, can help with different time zones because it is more of a collaborative approach instead of siloed teams. We work as one team.
Yes. Yes, and I think when you have remote team members, it's natural because you don't have a human interaction face-to-face every day. It's natural. As humans, we tend to think, well, it's just me behind this computer screen, right? So the mentality changes, but using Agile and being open to the flexibility, I think when it is implemented correctly, should make people feel like they are part of a larger team, especially when you track your progress. And it makes everyone feel that they are contributing and they're part of a larger goal that everyone's working towards. It should help you also build relationships if done correctly. So very good point. Very good point.
From Kenneth, personal experience, he used to have a monthly phone meeting with his boss in the US, and we took turns to arrange the meeting based on the time zone. For instance, one month I would take the call in the evening at home, and the next month my boss would take the call in the evening US time. He was based in Hong Kong.
Great recommendation. Great way to build relationships too, right? Knowing that you're not the only person as part of the project. You may be driving the project and you might be managing it as a leader, but recognizing the value in other people that are helping with the work is very important, especially as we work across different time zones, different cultures. That's a great idea. I love that idea. If you haven't, try that. That's a great thing to try.
From Russ, do you find project styles very different by different parts of the world? For example, Japan expects all or most of the details up front before implementation. What experience have you found on globally?
I would say, to a certain extent that might be true, and it might be true due to the nature of the work. So a manufacturing company, and other companies that are quantitatively heavy. So they, or like, for example, a bank, they rely heavily on numbers and there's very little room for error there. I think that's very, very specific. You also may have technology types of project management where it is what we call technically heavy and you have to build platforms and integrate systems. And it's more than just managing, like a brick and mortar aesthetic type of project. So that, in combination with different cultures, will make added layers of complexity. So when that's happening, again, it's good if you can set up time with them in person or use other tools that can help them feel that they're part of something, Zoom or Skype, and asking them questions about maybe what's important to them. And so knowing that those numbers are important to them up front, to me, says they're looking to build trust and they want to know. They want to know up front if this is something they can do, if it's a risk they want to take on. Regardless of your project management style, building the trust is something that will help you integrate the tools. And remembering that you manage the people first and then the processes, I think is really important as well.
From
These are stellar questions.
From Eugene, do you think the application of these processes are feasible even in public organization managed projects?
I do think so. I think even more so in a public institution or a nonprofit where there are less resources. And by less resources, remember, I mean capital, I mean financial resources. You have larger networks a lot of time and experience levels that are, again, from the very entry level person to someone who's been there 30 years. I mean, that's very valuable to know that they've been in a system for 30 years and they may have knowledge that's just either in their head or on paper or in their computer. Maybe they don't know how to use a system, but you do. And think about what that partnership could mean. Again, it's not about the financial part, but you have a partnership there and you know that this person knows certain things and you know other things. And what if you brought those skills together and the knowledge together, you could serve a larger population. Again, creating projects for leaders and project management for leaders is not about doing it yourself. It's about how you work with a team of other leaders as well. So I think it could. I think it absolutely could.
Also from Eugene, who do you think is a suitable candidate for a position of a project manager? For example, if it's a construction project, will you hire a construction engineer or just a person with a background in project management?
That's a great question. As I mentioned in the very beginning, different skill sets are required depending on the job market, and more applications now and positions are asking for a project management certification. And project management within construction is very different from project management within Google, for example. Those are different skill sets. You can also have people that aren't project management certified per se, but that have a good understanding of project management, and that might be just as helpful depending on what you're trying to achieve. So if you need someone to come in and build relationships and make larger networks, to oversee different projects, or maybe become a project sponsor. I'm not sure if a project management certification is necessary, but again, in your organization, it might be, versus someone who works for Google or within construction. Experience is still very valuable, and someone may know all of the skills and tools necessary, and they may have 30 years of experience that is just as valuable as a certification. So something specific to look at for what you're trying to achieve and what you need, what your organization needs, versus what might be necessary.
From Eugene, how likely are you to recommend the use of Microsoft Project to track the progress of the project?
I'm happy to recommend that. It's a very good tool that's out there. It's just as good, I think, as Jira or Trello or Kanbanchi. It's again all about what you have access to. So if you have access to something, that's what you can use to practice. And the interesting thing about these tools is that the more you use them, the more efficient you become in using them, and the better you get at using them. So I think it's just as good as the other tools if you can use it and if you have access to it. Absolutely.
And a note from Courtney, we use Basecamp, great for remote teams, Trello, and Slack, more just for messaging.
Great. Yes, Basecamp is another great technology platform as well. And it's used for different industries, depending on what you need. So that's great. Great to hear you're using all of these tools.
Well, thank you, Dr. Polk. Excellent presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you next month.
Thank you.